Hi folks, welcome to the lesson. It's a massive lesson. If you want to be remembered for all time, a good way of doing it is coming up with a theorem that is taught in schools all over the world in mathematics. But you're going to have to choose a different theorem to this because I'm afraid Pythagoras has beaten you to it. So let's crack on, get the job done. Pythagoras lived in about 500 BC. His theorem relates to the lengths of a right-angled triangle. The longest side of the right-angled triangle, the one opposite the right angle, is called the hypotenuse. And does anybody know what the theorem states? Well, pause the video, write it down, tell your parents, because here goes. There's a right-angled triangle with lengths labelled A, B and H. H is for hypotenuse because it's the side opposite the right angle. And the area of the square of the hypotenuse, which we h squared, that's the area of the green square because the length of each side is h. The square on one of the sides, which is a squared, and the square on the other side, which will be b squared. Pythagoras' theorem states that the area h squared equals the area a squared plus the area b squared. H squared equals a squared plus b squared is Pythagoras' theorem. Remember, h is the hypotenuse. Here's a square piece of floor, and there's a piece of carpet shaped in a right angle. And if we label those lengths A, B and H, and then take exactly the same right angled triangle and place it there, and then take exactly the same right angled triangle and place it there, and take exactly the same right angled triangle and place it there, we can see we're left with a space in the middle of the floor, and that space is a square, and therefore the area of the wooden floor that you can see left uncovered is h squared. Now, if we look at the right hand diagram, which is an exact replica of the left hand one, but this time if we just slide the pieces of carpet together, so exactly the same amount of wooden floor is shown in the right hand diagram as the left hand diagram, because exactly the same amount of wooden floor must be covered by the four triangles. Let's look at the areas. Well, as I said, the area of the wooden floor in the left hand side is h squared. The area of the wooden floor in the right hand side is a squared and b squared. So a squared plus b squared must equal h squared. And that is the simplest proof of Pythagoras' theorem that I know. So let's apply it in example 1. Want to find x. Remember, h squared equals a squared plus b squared, where h is the hypotenuse. Now in our right angle triangle, the side x is opposite the right angle, so x is the hypotenuse. Therefore, we will write not h squared, but x squared equals 3 squared plus 5 squared. 3 squared plus 5 squared is 34. And to find x from there, we square root both sides. So we press the square root button on our calculators, and then we round off, in this case, to 2 decimal places. In example 2, that's the theorem. Where's the hypotenuse? It's opposite the right angle, so it's x. X squared equals 5 squared plus 12 squared. 5 squared plus 12 squared is 169. We square root both sides, and we find that x is exactly 13. And in actual fact, 5, 12, 13 is called a Pythagorean triple, which is 3 whole numbers that fit Pythagoras' theorem. I'll leave it to you to answer the question there. Can you find any others? On to example 3. Do take care here. Do take care. First up, where's the hypotenuse? It's 8. We don't just blindly say x squared equals. It's the hypotenuse squared, and in this case 8 is the hypotenuse. So we would write down 8 squared equals x squared plus 6 squared. Now when x is on the right hand side, if you like, always put it first before the other side. I would always write it as x squared and then plus the other side squared in a question of this type. Therefore, in order to find x squared, we subtract 6 squared from both sides. So x squared is 8 squared minus 6 squared. That works out to be 28. We get on our calculators, find the square root of 28, and then we round off. And note, folks, that we just a little check that x, 5.29, x can't be longer than the hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is the longest side of a right angled triangle, so x is one of the shorter sides. Therefore, if you'd have added here, you'd have got the wrong answer. You'd have got an answer bigger than 8. Your answer must make sense. Okay? In example 4, let's find the hypotenuse. It's 14. So we would be writing 14 squared equals x squared plus 11 squared. Subtract 11 squared from both sides, and then work out 14 squared minus 11 squared, and that's 75. Square root both sides, get on our calculators, and then finally round off. And let's put all this together in a recap. A squared equals a squared plus b squared is Pythagoras' theorem, where h is the hypotenuse. And in a right angled triangle, which is what we are talking about, the hypotenuse is the longest side opposite the right angle. And the hypotenuse will always be the longest side. So whenever you're trying to find the hypotenuse, the side opposite the right angle, your answer should always be longer than the other two sides. So we've got h squared equals 5 squared plus 9 squared. That's 106. We square root both sides, and then we get our calculators out and round off. If we are finding one of the shorter sides, i.e. not the hypotenuse, you should end up doing some subtracting. So in this example, 10 is the hypotenuse, so it's 10 squared equals x squared plus 7 squared. We do some subtracting. We subtract 7 squared from both sides. X squared equals 51. We square root both sides and then get on our calculators. And if there's anything about the video you haven't understood, just watch it back. And if you have, that's great, because that's the job done.